Hey friends, welcome to the Adventures of Blink. I am of course Blink, and I'm so glad you've joined me today. Make sure you like, subscribe, and click that notification bell so that we'll stay connected. And of course, you can always drop by the blog for more content as well. Now last week, we got our main loop working and then we added in some logging and our configuration file. Today we're going to build some screens. In Pygame, a screen is just a surface where we draw things. We're going to make multiple screens for different purposes. Our first screen is for a main menu. This will be what appears before the game starts and allows the user to navigate the game. Let's go build the screen and then we'll connect it to our main file. So in order to create our main menu, the first thing we need to do is create a file to hold the class that we're going to write. It's going to live in the screens folder. So we're just going to come in here and we're going to do menu.py. And now menu.py is going to be a Python class. I'm not going to go too deep into what classes are and how they work. I'm going to kind of presume that you know a little bit about the Python language, but we'll talk about some of the features that we're using along the way. For starters, we're going to need a couple of imports. So we need Pygame and we need logging. The reason that we're importing Pygame is because even though this isn't actually a part of the game where you're interacting with the ball or the paddle or anything, you're building the menu as a sort of quote-unquote game that you play in order to get to the breakout game. So there's a new game button and there's a quit button and stuff like that. And so you have to click on the right button in order to go to the different places. Functionally, it works very much the same way that the game actually does. All right, so it's time to write our main menu class. Class main menu. Easy enough, right? Inside of a class, you're of course going to have a constructor, and it's defined as underscore underscore init underscore underscore in Python. I'm going to leave this as pass just for the moment, but the parameters are going to be really important. We're going to pass in a screen and a config. Now the config you already are really familiar with because that's the config that we built the JSON file for, and we're tracking, like it gets sucked in at the beginning of the app running. That's how that config makes its way in here. When we initialize the main menu in main.py, we pass the config into it so that this class knows all of the app configurations that it needs. And we're going to skip over that. We're just going to define a few methods here to kind of get your thought process together, and then we'll go actually fill in the gaps later. So the other things that we're going to need in here, we're going to need a setup buttons. And we're making that private because we want to only use it within the class context. We don't want to set up the buttons from anywhere else. And I'm just going to leave that with a pass. And then the other things we would need would be a draw, because it's a screen, which means it's just a canvas for us to put things on. After we define the things, we have to tell the application how to draw them. So we're going to need that, and that's also just got self. And we'll fill in the gap later. And the last thing on our list is a run. So this is a component that we're going to build an infinite loop inside of the infinite loop, right? The main.py is an infinite loop that keeps us in there until we decide to quit the game. But when we open a screen, we give that screen control. So the way that we give it control is to call its run method. And the run method is an infinite loop inside of the screen that says as long as we haven't finished whatever's supposed to happen on this screen, then this screen has control of, like, from the application perspective. That's really valuable for us because it lets us keep track of when we have sent the control and when we've passed it back. And we can also use that as a way to pass data throughout the application that might be important. For instance, with a screen like this, the main menu should pass back what the user has selected. This is how we do it. When we exit the infinite loop inside of run, we're going to send back, there's going to be a return statement that has a message that we're sending back so that we can pick it up in main.py and know how to respond. So I will also put that as a pass. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the init method, and we're going to define a couple of things that need to happen right out of the gate. The first is that we're going to initialize our logger. We're going to call logging, and we're going to get the logger, and we're going to pass in this class's name. And that is really important because it means we're using the base configuration that we used in our main.py, but now it's used throughout this class as well. Setting up a logger here means I now have it available for this entire class to be able to consume it at will. That's going to be important because now all of our log messages go back to the same file. We can actually just follow people through the use of our application and see all the places that they touched. Now the next thing we're going to do is pull in these screen and config variables. So we're going to make a self.screen that's part of the class, and it's going to grab that value, and then we're going to make a self.config, and we're going to make that value go in there. That's really important because now the entire class has access to that data. The screen is going to be how we configure, like this is where we're going to run. And the config, obvious, we need that data in order to know how to build our screen. Okay, so the next thing to do inside of init is to start building out some of the extra variables we're going to need. For instance, we're going to want the background color so that we know how to build our screen. So we need all the elements that help us make up the screen. In the background color, we're going to do a config.get. And we're going to look in our menu object, and then we're going to do a get for the BG color. And you're probably wondering how I decided to do it this way. One last thing I'll do, and then I'll talk through how this get works. So 0, 0, 0. All right, so what did I just define here? This thing is kind of a big, nasty looking mess, isn't it? So we've got a config object that we're using, and that came in from our config file. So I'll pull up the config file, and what we'll do, I'll try to squeeze this down a little bit, and we'll put the config off to the side here. Now, there. So config.get, and we're looking for the menu object. So we don't have a menu object today. We should build one. So I'll keep things alphabetical, and I'll just put down here a menu. Okay, and so now I have an element called menu, and inside there I'm going to look for bg_color. So I need to create that object as well in my JSON. And the way this works is just like you're defining an array, because that's all it is. Okay, so there's the background color. And we're setting it to 0, 0, 0, which I'm using red, green, blue. And so zeros in everything means the background of the screen will be black. We could change that to be whatever color we want, but that's the default that I'm kind of going with. Now let's go back and look at line 10 over here, and let's talk about what this means and why it's built this way. This is a matter of being a little defensive in your programming, and what we're doing is saying in the config variable, we're expecting to get an object called menu, and that's this thing. But what happens if that doesn't exist, like it didn't exist before we started building this out? When it doesn't exist, we want to just return a blank. And the reason this is important is that if you just said, like you could do this shorter, and you could say something like config and then do menu. And that would totally work as long as menu existed. But if we can't guarantee that it exists because we don't know if somebody fouled up the config file, like there could be a problem and somebody deleted a bunch of things. So if we do it this way, we'll get an error and it'll crash the application. If we do it the way that it's defined here, it handles the error gracefully. And the application still won't behave well, but what it does is it says, I'm expecting to see menu. If I don't see menu, I give you a blank. So a none, an empty object. Now, once I get that back, I've now captured everything that's highlighted here. And I'm looking for a background color. Well, if background color isn't in here, then I want to use this default. So we're hard coding a default into the application, yes, but that's only a fallback position for whatever's in here. So we can still reconfigure the entire application from the config file, and there will be defaults in here that back up in case something gets completely wrecked. So that's why it's defined in this way. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can work on the other objects that are supposed to be in here. All right, so I'm not going to bore you with all of the things, but what we're going to do is effectively create a series of these. So we'll have a self.text color, and we'll have a self.font size, and we'll have a self.font. And all of these elements, oh, I need to do like a self.screen underscore width and a self.screen underscore height as well. Okay, we'll do some movie magic here and make all of those things suddenly appear in the way they're supposed to. But the short version is you want to define all of these things so that you've got your entire configuration built when you start up the main menu class. Okay, there you have it. I've actually built out most of that stuff. There's a couple here that we're going to talk about separately. I'm going to make a little space in here like this so that you can see what we're dealing with, but I wanted to show you the menu object now has a background color and a text color to match with the variables we created. And it also has a font size, which we're going to talk about font size in just a moment here because that one's going to be a little funky. And then it has a font. And you'll notice there's a path to a font listed inside of this variable. Now, that's something I haven't really talked about. But let's take a minute and do that real quick. So assets, fonts, blocks 2, blocks 2. So if you look in my assets folder under fonts, I actually brought in a folder previously called blocks 2. I went out to a free font website and I found this one and I was like, oh, I really like that. So I'm going to use that in my application. You can totally do that as long as, you know, the licensing is appropriate and you're not, you know, breaking any laws. But I grabbed this font. So the way it works is there's a TTF file, a true type font file. And I brought along the license information here and some information about it that was provided in the download that I got because I just wanted to keep things above board. I want the documentation to be there. I didn't create the font. I borrowed it from this guy, what his name was in there, Brian Kent. So he made a font. I thought it was really cool and I was like, hey, I want to use it in my app. So that's what I did. But once I put it in the fonts folder, I brought all this stuff in. I have to then tell the application where it can go find this font file that I want to use. So we'll talk through that here. First of all, we have to talk about the size of the font. And so I'm going to need to look at getting the raw font size first. So the raw font size, or actually it's just a variable that I'm using temporarily here. So we're just going to do that. It's not going to be a class variable that we hold on to. So the raw font size equals, and I go get this out of my config. So this comes in, oops, I was supposed to do config.get there. .get, and the raw font size is the font size variable from in there. And if I don't provide it, like if it's not in there, I'm just going to default to 60. Now, I pull this in because the next thing I have to do is figure out if that's a valid font size. So I don't know necessarily what data is being put in there, but I need to data check. I need to validate what I'm using, because if somebody puts the wrong kind of data in there, if they put a font size in there of basketball or something, it's not going to work and it's going to cause me to crash. So I'm going to get ahead of that. And this is, again, being defensive about my programming. I'm going to insert that raw font size, and then I'm going to do an if here. So the font size I'm going to use is raw font size if is instance raw font size int, else just default to 60. Now the reason this is important is because I'm now checking the data here. If this 72 was put in as a string, that could be a problem. The application might not succeed. It needs to be put in as an integer. And so if they don't do it correctly, I'm going to address it and say, I'm ignoring whatever data you gave me because it's not valid, and I'm going to build my app the way I know I'm supposed to. Oops. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the loading of the font itself. So I'm going to pull that out here so it's on one line all by itself. This is done by using Pygame's font class. And so pygame.font, and then you pass in the path to the font and the size that you've decided. You have to have these things set before you can actually load the font. So it's important to know how big it's going to be. This gets a little funky later on, because if you ever change the size of like if you have multiple things that are using the same font but in different sizes, means you have to load them as different variables. So it's important to think carefully about the way that you load your data. Now back up here on the font size thing, we could actually use our logger to our advantage, and we could do logger.debug, and we could tell it, we'll pass an f string, and we'll do font size equals self.font underscore size. And so now I can have a debug message that tells me what font size was chosen. And of course, we could add in tons of other debugger stuff. We could validate, all of these things. Maybe it is actually worth doing, where we could do logger.debug f, and then we'll do font equals, and we'll go get the config value again, and we'll just paste that in. So that could come in handy to know as well. Basically, if you start the app up and it doesn't look right, you have some way to see in the debugger what's been done. All right, that should give us enough to get the thing off the ground. The next thing we're going to do is start actually building the way that things appear on the screen. So we're going to do this by creating first a list of menu items. So what things can be in our menu. We have self.menu underscore items, and we'll make that an array, and we're going to do label and the first one will say new game, and its action, oops, there we go, will be new. The next element will be a label that says quit, and its action will of course be quit. Now, why am I doing this? Well, because all of these menu items are going to look the same from a code perspective. And so we can treat them as actually the same kinds of things. We build the menu items this way, and then we build a button for each one. And then once we have the buttons in place, we can just use this list as a way to make sure we're building them consistently. So the next thing we'll do is create a self.buttons. This is also going to be a list, but I'm going to leave it empty. And the reason is because I could start by just making the buttons in the list the same way and matching them up. But what I really want to do is just push this off to a method that will take care of it. And that's what setup buttons is down there. If you see on line 29, that's what we're going to call next is setup buttons. And we don't have to actually pass anything because this is a member method, or this is a member object within our main menu. So now we've created that. What happens next? Well, in setup buttons, we're actually going to have to figure out how to put the buttons on the screen. So we'll remove the pass here, and we'll start by defining the Y coordinate where we want the menu to begin. So we're going to put start Y equals 200. And then we're going to do padding equals 75. You'll see what those do in a second here. So the next thing we're going to do is go through the list of menu items. So for I colon or comma item in enumerate self.menu items. So if you're fairly new to Python, you're probably familiar with the idea of doing for x in y. So you have y, it's a list of things, and you do for x, and then that's the iteration of going through the list and pulling each one. But what if you actually wanted to keep track of the index as well? Well, this is how you do it. You put the I in front of it, or whatever variable you want. This is the index. This is the actual item. And so when you do the enumerate, it will list the index alongside it. And so you get a count of, here's item number 1, number 2, number 3, right down the list. Okay. And so once we've started this for loop, we're going to do text surface equals self.font. So the font that we've defined already, it's going to render, and we're going to grab the label out of the menu item. And we'll pass it true and do self.text color. So now that we've defined the surface, we need to get a rectangle set up and put the text surface in the proper place on the form, on the screen. So we'll do rect equals text surf dot get rect center equals, and we're going to have to do a little math here. So we do self dot screen width, and we want it to be divided by 2. And then, oops, there we go. We're going to go to start Y for the location. So that was the center X coordinate, says move to the center of the screen. And then we're going to do start Y plus I times padding. Okay, and that's going to define the location of this button. Now the cool part is it defines the location of all the buttons, because as we cycle through, I updates, and that moves us down beyond the next block. And so that's how we build out our menu. Then the last thing we're going to have to do inside of this for loop is self.buttons.append. And we're going to pass in the 2 variables. So we want the rectangle, and we want action to be the item action. And we want the label, oops, there, to be the item label. It was confused because I left my colon off. It was right in front of me the whole time. Okay, so what that has done is it's now populated this buttons collection. And the buttons collection is now going to be the way that we can keep track of all of the buttons at once. Now, if you're paying close attention, you've realized we haven't actually drawn anything on the screen. We've set up a bunch of things that should be drawn on the screen, all those buttons, or all two of them in this case, but we haven't actually drawn anything, so the screen would stay blank. And in fact, we still have a pass on the draw method, so we should probably fix that. So what we're going to do in draw, we're going to start by filling the screen with the background color. And once we've done that, we now have the ability to do the title font. And the title font, if you remember, we talked earlier about the way fonts work. You're going to have to redefine the font because we're going to make it larger. This is going to be the title of the game, and there's going to be like a big title, and then below that will be smaller menu items. And so we're going to do font. I can copy most of the stuff from above. So we'll come back up here and we'll grab this whole Pygame call, and we'll just put it right here. And I made a mistake here because I need a self.config. So that was actually something that did need to change. But we're not changing the font, like the choice. All we're doing is changing the size. And so we're going to make that 20 points bigger. Okay, so after we've done the title font, the next thing we want is a title surface. And that will just be title font dot render self.config dot get from the app section. Which I don't believe we have yet. Yeah, so we're going to need to create an app section. And in here, we're going to have a name. Oh, this is JSON. I can't use single quotes. And we will call this Blink Block Blitz, because everybody should have some alliteration in their lives. And I need to add a comma, so that's there. Okay, now we're going to come down here, and we were doing app. And after that, we need to do a .get. Get the name. And just so that we have the ability to see, we'll call this blocks. So it'll default to blocks if the app name is not stored. Okay, then we need a true and a self.text color. So that pulls in the values that are necessary to do the surface. And now, just like with the buttons, we're going to do a title rect. And this is to have the rectangle from the service, or from the surface, I mean, service. Do center equals self dot screen width divided by 2. And we'll make it 100 tall. Now we can do self.screen.blit. All right, so this is an important line because this tells the screen to actually do the update. Personally, I don't even remember what the blit actually is. I know it has to do with flipping bits somehow within the image. But the short version is when you have prepared an object and you want to display that object, then you call blit, and it takes care of putting it on the screen for you. But that's not the only thing we want to do. See, that was just for the title. So now we have blink block blitz across the top, and we've displayed it. But we have something else that we're supposed to display. Remember what it was? The buttons. Oops. Self.buttons. Now, one thing we're going to add into this, it's not like we could just call the text surface and render it and be good. But wouldn't it be awesome if we could make a minor adjustment to the way things work? Let's check the mouse position. And we can do that with Pygame very easily. We just do a mouse.getPause. And then we're going to do a color. Now the color we're going to add, let's pick a different number. So there. If the button collides with the mouse. Else, we're going to do self.text color. So the default color is what we've actually stored in the text color in our configuration. So that's going to come out of app config here. It's going to be 255s, which is white. Okay, but what we're going to do is darken it just a little bit. So it's going to go from white to gray if we're hovering over the title or over the button. Okay, so after we've done that, we're going to do a text surface because it's time to display the button itself. So font.render, we're going to do button label and true and color. And then, just like before, we're going to do a self.screen.blit, and we're going to do the text surface. Button rect. All right, and the very last thing is a pygame.display.flip. This is necessary because after we've blitted all the different things, sometimes we'll have artifacts left on the screen. Display flip says clear everything out and refresh me. So that's the purpose of doing that, just to keep everything looking crisp and clean. All right, and that leaves us with one method to write, which is the run method. So remember we talked about this. Run is actually going to be its own infinite loop. And the idea here is that we have to maintain control within this particular menu and pass that control back only when we're ready. So this menu stays in charge of the application. Everything that happens on this menu in this particular Python file until we hit the end of this infinite loop. So we'll start with telling the logger that we want to, I want to do an info, and we're going to say main menu opened. And then after we've logged that, we do our infinite loop. So when we come to the main menu, while true, for event in pygame.event.get, if event.type equals pygame.quit. So Pygame has some constants built in for these event types, and pygame.quit is the universal signal in Pygame that says we are done and we're exiting the program. So what we're going to do is just return the word quit, and I'll show you how this works in a little while. But let me get things on the screen here, and then we'll discuss what we're doing. So if event.type equals pygame.mouse button down. So first we check to see if a mouse button has been pressed. If event.button equals 1. So then we have to check whether it's the left click or the right click or one of the other things that you could click on a mouse. You know, if you have one of those fancy mice that have tons of buttons, you might get a different symbol here. I'm going to leave a note here just so we remember this is what checks the left click. Then we're going to do for button in self.buttons. So now we're going to go through our list of buttons. We'll come back up here to the top and look. Remember, we made the button list based on these menu items. So there should only be 2 buttons because there'd be 1 for each. And we made those here in the draw method. Did we make those in the draw method? Let me go look again. I don't want to tell you wrong. No, we made those in the setup buttons method. I should pay more attention to what I'm typing, huh? Okay, so for each of the buttons, if button rectangle dot collide point event dot position. So if we have clicked on the rectangle for this button, let's do a log message. And actually, this should probably be a debug. Menu selection equals button, and let's grab the action out of it. So that way we know what the button has been set to do. Okay, now after we've logged it, return button action. All right, and then we're going to go to here and do self draw. All right, so now that I've got all that on the screen, let's take a second and look at what's going on. We enter our infinite loop, and the only things that can happen in here are we can press quit or we can press new. So we have those 2 options. Now there's a couple of ways to do a quit, and we can look at that when we actually load this up. We'll see how the different options for Pygame are. But generally speaking, you've got 2 things that can happen on the main menu. You can hit new game or you can hit quit. So because we have those 2 things, that's what we have inside of our loop. and each one of them ends with a return statement. So the idea behind the main menu is we're going to stay here in this infinite loop, in this while loop right here. And we're going to keep doing this. So we're going to check for those two conditions, and then we're going to redraw the screen. And that's all that happens over and over and over and over. We're going to keep redrawing the main menu until one of those two things is true. When one of them is true, then we're returning the message, and that's what takes care of it for us. So you might ask, well, one of the buttons is a quit button. Why do you have the extra? That has to do with Pygame, because there are ways that you can quit a program that don't involve pressing the quit button on the menu itself. For instance, here on my Mac, I have a little red X to close a window. If I close the main menu window, it's going to close the application because of this right here. And that should be pretty much all there is to the main menu. We can add other options later. All we would have to do to add a new option is come up here to the menu items and put it in the list. So let's say we wanted to be able to save and load a game. So while you're playing, you can pause and then hit save, and it'll save your position in the game. Okay, well, that's fine, but the load game is going to have to be here on the menu. So we would add a load game, and then we would tie it to an action that said load. Maybe we want to open an options menu. Well, that would be a separate screen. We would go build an options screen and make it so that you can configure all the options. And then in here, we would add another entry that said label options, action, options. It's important to see that we're not necessarily going to open those other screens and things from here. All we're doing is selecting them, and then down here in the run, we're passing back the action that's been chosen. So the main menu doesn't know how to do any of those things. All it knows to do is to say which one it was supposed to do. Okay, now that we've created a main menu, we're going to plug it into our main.py. The main.py infinite loop is going to need some modification in order to use the new menu. The way to think about this is that each screen is going to return the state of the application, and the infinite loop is going to be controlled by that state and respond to changes in it. Let's start our modifications now. All right, so we'll open up main.py, and we're looking here at the main method. It doesn't really do much yet, and we've got to do some pretty heavy lifting to get this ready to go. So game playing equals true, that's going to stick around. Configure loading, logging setting up the logger, all of that stuff stays. So we have the pygame.init, but we're going to have to add a little bit more to this configuration to get ourselves set up. So the first thing we're going to do is create a screen. Now a screen is going to be our interaction with the physical screen, where we have the ability to put things up and like change the things that are displayed. So we're going to create a screen. We're going to go pygame.display.set mode, and we're going to have to store this in our config app, because what we're setting for the mode is the width and the height of the screen. So we're going to do let's see, config app screen width. You know what? I need to do this differently. So I need to be more defensive, right? So get app. And if I don't get the app, I get a blank. And I do get, and I do screen width. And if that doesn't come in, then I'm going to do 400 wide. It's going to be small, but at least there's something there. Just, it's a chance to see that we have a problem. Okay. So then the next thing I need, I go here, and I'm going to do config.get app, and that's going to be the same thing. And then I'm going to do .get, and you guessed it, screen height. And for this, I'll also do 400, just so we have values in there. All right, now that means I need to go open up my config, and I need to put screen width, and our actual screen width, we're going to go a little bit bigger than that. I mean, the MacBook has a nice size resolution screen, so I'm going to do a width maybe 1200, and the screen height I'm going to go with 700, and I think that should make a reasonably good looking sized window for our game. All right, so I've now defined the screen. Let's see, the next thing I need to do is we'll go on ahead and set display, set the caption on that screen. So it's going to come up with a window. If you think of just the way a normal application does, it has sort of a title bar at the top of the window, right? So we're going to set the caption, and I'm going to do config.get app, and then I'm going to do get name, and we'll just call it blocks again, right? By default, we already have an app name loaded in here, so it's going to pull app.name, and it's going to be Blink Block Blitz. But we'll see this when we get everything set up. Okay, so now we've actually finished our Pygame initialization. It has all that it needs to get started. Now, while game playing, here we have to make some changes. So we started the game loop, but now we're going to, instead of just setting things to false, it's time to actually make this do something. So we're going to start by defining a menu selection. And this is going to be main menu screen. And we'll do screen and config. And you'll see that's not been defined yet. We're going to set this up in just a second. So we'll do logger.debug and pass in menu selection, and that'll be debug printed out so we can see. Now the next thing we're going to do is match menu selection. If you're not familiar with the match, if you've seen this in other languages, it's often called switch. It's a way to do sort of a series of ifs in one abbreviated statement. So the match says, look at this value and compare it to these cases. So we're going to have a case for each thing that the main menu can send back. And what did we learn a minute ago? I'm just going to put passes in here so we can keep moving on. We have two things that can come back from the main menu, new and quit. So what are we going to do in those cases? Well, actually, we'll go ahead and fill this one in since I'm right here. We'll do logger.debug, and it's good to print out that we matched on quit. And then we'll do game playing equals false. So that game playing is going to kick us, like the very next thing that happens after the match is we loop. And so game playing will be false, and then we will bounce out and we will quit the game. But what happens in the case of new? New is a little different. So in the new case, we'll go on ahead and do a log message because that's important. We matched on new. And so we're going to do play game screen. for that, we have to pass in the screen and the config. Now, we haven't defined Pygame screen yet, so there's that. But that's something we got to look at. All right. Let's go on ahead and define these. So remember that the way Python works, because we're actually not in a class in main, we could have made main a class, but we didn't. We just made it a list of methods. So we have to make sure that all the methods live above the main method in the code so that the interpreter can find them. So we'll come up here, we'll do it after the loading stuff there. We're going to create, let me go get those names, main underscore menu underscore screen. So we're going to go main menu screen. Okay, and we notice that we're passing in a screen and a config. So we'll just keep those names. The scoping of variables means that that's not going to interfere and everything should be fine. So what do we do in the main menu screen? Well, we're going to create a menu and we're going to do it just like that. And main menu doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? Because we haven't added it to our imports. So we need to come up here and we need to do from menu, or wait, no, from screens.menu import main menu. Okay, so now it recognizes it. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a response variable. It's going to look at menu.run. And just so we have a note here to remember, this blocks until a choice is made. Okay, and then we're going to return response. So let's walk through this. We have an infinite loop down here in main. While the game is playing, we're going to do stuff. We're going to go load up a main menu screen, and we're going to, so when we create the object up here, we run the menu.run. Now that's going to do the drawing thing, and it's going to do the infinite loop that lives inside of menu.py over here, right? So it's going to stay here. It's going to redraw the main menu until we make a selection. When we make a selection, that kicks us back, button.action returns. That's what gets returned into this response, and this response gets returned down here to menu selection. Menu selection is then passed to the match. So we've either matched on new or quit, because those are the two options that can come back from our menu. And that's how we know what to do. If we get a new, that means it's time to go play the game. And so we're going to play a game screen. Let's go ahead and define that. Okay. We'll do play game screen. Screen config. And here's the cool part. Because this can't do anything yet, I don't have a screen built. We're going to just do this. A simple pass. Now we should be able to do source main.py. And let's see what happens. We picked up an error. What did we do wrong? Screen width is 1200, like we put a number in there. Something that it could be really helpful to do sometimes is to break things up. So I'm going to do a new variable called S5e3, and I'm going to do config.get, and we're going to go to app, Okay, and then I'm going to do S height. And we'll do the same thing, and I'll just do a copy paste here to make that quicker.
And so now in my set mode, I should be able to just do...
Oh, you know what? This is a tuple. I remember that now. So I should be doing S width and S height inside of a tuple. Now let's see how that looks.
And then I hit another error.
Main menu has no... caught a typo. Should have seen that earlier. There we have it. So there's our title, Blink Block Blitz. That was pulled in from the config file. And then we created a title block using our custom font. And then we did the same thing with the new game and the quit. And so you can see the two options are there. Now this is what I was talking about. In Pygame, there's always going to be the option, you know, in the OS window manager, like the buttons up there, they need to be able to quit the program. But at the same time, I want to be able to use that as well. And if I hit new game, nothing happens right now because I have no way to load the game window. I haven't built that. Now that we've got a main menu in place and the selections can be returned from it, let's build a game window screen. This screen will be where the actual breakout game gets played. Our first version iteration of the game window isn't going to have anything in it. We're just going to display an empty screen. All right, so just like before, we're going to go in the screens and we're going to add our new screen. And so the new one we're going to do is game_window. So I'm going to come here and do game_window.py. And this will be our new place to work. So in order to make game window work, we're going to need import Pygame. And I'm going to grab a bunch of imports here that we may not even get to right away, but they'll be helpful to have when it comes time to do things. So we're going to pull in Pygame and logging because those are both necessities. We're going to import math, and we're going to import random, and we're going to create a class game window. All right, now the game window, we're going to define our constructor. Now, here we have a little bit of extra stuff to add. We're going to do screen and config, remember? And that's so that when we call the game window, we can actually pass in the screen information and the config information from our main.py. We'll leave this as a pass for the moment because we're going to have to figure out what we're setting. You know what? Actually, yeah. Let's go on ahead and define run. Okay. Now, this is going to be the same kind of thing as we saw in the other. We're going to do a running equals true. And then we're going to do a while running some stuff happens, we'll just leave that as a running equals false so that it instantly closes out the game. Effectively, we'll create the window and then uncreate the window immediately. And that will be our starting point. And then after this, what do you want to do when you leave the game? So after you exit the loop, we're going to do return and menu. So now if I look at my menu selection, I actually don't need to do that. It doesn't matter. I can return nothing from the game window, although I may choose to return other things later. So we'll leave it in. It actually isn't being checked, the return value from the game window, so we'll just leave that as is. We'll probably use that later on to do something. Okay, so we can go on ahead and run this, and we'll see that the app starts up just fine, and we hit new game. And actually, this would be a great place for us to drop in. You know what? Let's go on ahead and build the logger. So we're going to do self.logger equals logging.getLogger. And then we do name. I believe that's the structure. We can go back and look. Oh, I need the self. Self.class name. Okay, now that I have that, I can do started the game window successfully. And that way, if I go back here, I need to change this to, debug level. And now let's run this. I know why it's not showing up yet, because in our main, we're still just skipping out on doing this. So I'm going to do game screen equals, and I already forgot, it's called game window. Okay, so I need to do a from screens.menu, or from screens.gamewindow, import game window. Then down here I'll do game window, and we'll pass it the screen and the config. Response equals game screen.run, and return response. Okay, so now I should be able to run the game, and I see things happen, but the only way to know that it's loading up is to look for the game window log message, because I don't actually have anything displaying yet. So we can see that everything is configured correctly. We can start building our game window. All right, this looks like a good stopping point for today. We've made it possible for our game to start up, show a main menu, and the player can either kick off a new game or they can quit. Kicking off a new game opens an empty game window where we'll build our game next time. Let's go ahead and push our changes to the episode 3 branch. Okay, so I've already put myself on the episode 3 branch. I did that off camera. I was just trying to get everything organized the way I wanted. But if I come here and do a get status, we can see we've changed the app config, we've changed the main.py, we've added a game window and a menu. So we're going to do a get add dot to bring in the 2 new files. Then we're going to do a get commit -am episode 3. And what did we do? Menus. Or I'll just do menu and game screen. And we'll push that up. And we're all set. Now we can go over to our GitHub window and we'll look here. We actually see that the changes were made. So we're going to merge episode 3 into main. Now if we look at our code, we can see all 3 episodes in place and main is updated with the latest information. All right, that wraps up today's adventure. Remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and of course, stop by the blog. I'll see you next time.